Okay, we now entered the question and answer period of this session. We've got plenty of time for Q&A before we get ready for the after hours event. So this is the time to depose our panelists in more detail on their various digital transformation journeys and learnings. We've added two additional members, panel members here. Saeed Urtani, I'll get his name right, from ABB has joined, and he's partnered with activities that were done by ABB with our friends from BASF, and so they can elaborate a little more detail of the solution space and the challenges. A second member of our panel is Andy Bain. He's the CEO of Element Analytics and a data solutions company, and he and his organization helped Steve Beamer with the solutions he described to you. So what I'm going to do before I open up questions to the audience, actually pose questions to our new panel members. Your customers are here. But I'd like to understand in a broader sense, starting with Saeed, fundamentally, what are the challenges that other customers are presenting to you relative to implementing digital transformation solutions? So let's start with Saeed, and what are the challenges and problems that have been facing?
Thanks, Mike. So if we look at the challenges in the petrochemical space, I think we have the asset reliability, asset performance management challenges. We have the energy management challenges. So there is this technology side of challenges. But I think the most important challenge is what you mentioned earlier, this lack of value proposition, is really getting and identifying and nailing down what is it that the value we would like to create before talking about the technology itself. And this is really what has driven the collaboration with BASF, is first understanding these work processes. Where are we creating the value before talking about any of the technology? We hear a lot of things about technology, but if we are starting from technology and push into the organization, there is a very high risk that this will fail, that will not scale, and it will only stay at the stage of POC. So co-creating this solution together, looking at how the ecosystem can support into moving forward, putting a solution architecture with the end user, is the way forward. So there is the technology challenge, yes, we all know them, safety, reliability, profitability, and so on. But it's really the mindset and the change management challenge that is posing a bigger problem in adopting such of these technologies.
Thank you. Follow-on question to Andy Bain. I hadn't previewed Steve's presentation prior to the event, and as yourselves, I'm looking at some of his slides. The mere size of the data challenge that was facing you just staggered me, and the amount that's being handled. So, Andy, how do we address this massive amount of I'll call it islands of information that are in this particular industry, and how do we reduce it down to a problem that can be actually handled? I mean, I'm still amazed at what Steve and his team has accomplished. So how do you get your arms around this very diverse data that's available to be digitized and utilized? How do you get around it?
Well, I think that, Mike, it certainly starts with a customer like BP that has a very well thought out plan and use cases that they want to go after. And really collaborating with that customer to understand what data can you bring to those use cases in order to achieve your transformation objectives. And so it's not necessarily going after all the data per se, but it's going after the data that will bring together the capabilities of, for example, and one of the applications Steve talked about is for the process engineers who want to manage excursions to operating envelopes. And so you need to be able to understand what the P&IDs look like, build the context around the time series data. And so you just sort of scale up from there. And some of those numbers really, we're going on a platform by platform, site by site basis. So it grows over time. So you attack it, a little bit at a time. And what's terrific about some of these new secular technologies around cloud and big data and some of the data processing architectures and these new architectural patterns that are emerging around data hubs and how you can move data and connect to it, is they've really been tested in other industries. And I know it's not necessarily the best thing to bring up ad tech, for example, at a conference like this, but some of the capabilities that are available now to industry that have been developed in other areas that can bring significant scale and problems that have been solved against that can be applied in these industries. And so I would encourage you all to, take a hard look at some of that. I know there's some who are allergic to the cloud, and we tend to have some of those debates, but the technologies that are available do help us, attack that scale problem.
Common theme, working with the customers to really clearly define the use case. Don't just throw this massive amount of data up against the wall.
Yeah.
Okay, good insight. Questions from the audience for the group, or don't be shy. We've got one over here.
Okay. Hi, Keith Schultz with Dow Chemical. Steve, something near and dear to my heart is the data lake. That's something I'm having to deal with. So I empathize with the struggle it sounds like you're going through and identifying. So I guess one question would be, what advice you would have to someone else trying to embark on that journey and make mistakes?
Well, I guess as an engineer, the data lake's still a bit of magic to me. So I think there were a lot of issues early on. One of the things I see with the data lake is the data catalog and the data tables are all in IT speak, and you need something to translate that into end user subject matter expert speak. Because what we found is we've dumped a lot of data into the data lake and people still can't find it, right? So I know Microsoft is working on that we're in Azure. I know they're working on Azure Data Catalog version 2, and we're participating in that as a partner with them. But I think there's still a lot of problems about once you get it there, people still got to find it to be able to do something with it. And that's where we've used Element to help us do that.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, follow up. So we're looking at doing asset hierarchy, and I think that's what you're talking about, identifying how to tie the tags, the data tags you're pulling logically, across a business, right? So someone, a data scientist somewhere else can find that. So that data catalog, it sounds like that's the same, I guess, as a asset hierarchy.
So the asset hierarchy, we started with the project hierarchy because, we weren't standard, right? But on new projects, we are standard. So we started with our project hierarchy, but you find that, you have to map the old stuff to the new, and you need a tool to do that. And I don't want to go change the old stuff. I don't want to go back to Pi and rewrite all the tag numbers or do any of that stuff. So, it's doing that in the data lake before you ship out to, for our big project, for the 2 data lakes we're feeding in our suppliers, one with the original company that started us on this journey and one with the one we're collaborating with, you line up the data first in the data lake and send it out to them. But once it's lined up for them, it's also lined up for your users.
If I could just add something related to both your questions. I think as Steve said, just landing your data in a data lake, it doesn't mean you're going to find the signals that you need that's in the data. So you do need those hierarchies. And clearly one of the challenges is you need different hierarchies for different use cases, or the reliability team needs something different than the maintenance team, et cetera. But it's the same equipment, it's the same process. And so how do you do that in a flexible way, and how do you bring that together and orchestrate it? And so one of the things that we do is we separate really the relationships between the data from the actual hierarchies. And if you can do that, then you can instantiate then whatever hierarchy you need based on use case, or you just have an engineer that wants to get to the data lake with a tool like Seek or Power BI. then they're able to explore that data and solve problems in a way that's meaningful for them as an individual engineer.
I'll stand up since I'm behind the podium. I'll add a little bit to that. One of the things that I think is important is the concept of a data dictionary, even a document dictionary. And that's to ensure that within your own company, you're speaking the same language. You're calling A, you're calling B. So, that's something that we're looking at right now, and we'll be carrying that discussion forward.
Another
Hi.
question.
Ashok Patel from Owens Corning. We're just starting journey on the same data lake, and I understand that you already did some pilot and all the things are moving. What we are afraid of is so many data attacks and so many plants wanted to send this data into the cloud-based things. Did you have to go through a lot of overhaul for the network and working with IT and finding the ways to forward that data in timely manner, and how that worked out?
Yeah, I think the IT organization has been on that journey. As we started this, we learned that, there are places where we did need to update bandwidth. We have a whole digital foundations program that's working towards, do we have the right bandwidth? That's going to only grow as time goes on in the field, Wi-Fi and some of those other things. So that program started as we started to learn those lessons and has been going for about 2 years.
Other questions over here?
Brad Houck, ExxonMobil. So I really appreciate you talking about the work you went through to get the data into the data lake, the BP example. You mentioned the use of a product, Predex. Can you talk a little bit about how you're generating value with that tool?
So the platform has a lot of things in it, right? And we're started with, it's got a workflow in it. So we built our workflow of how we're going to do process surveillance. This is upstream, so it's not the complexity of downstream. I'm separating oil, gas, and water, basically. We started with doing the basic things we could already do, but it took 5 systems to do. We put them in one place. So we started with process surveillance, operating envelope excursions, case management, and now we're getting to the point where we can feed the machine learning in there and feed the predictive analytics. So the value, really, we believe, the step change in value comes from the predictive analytics, because we could do all those other things before. But putting it all together in one place has really opened up the engineers. The engineers are finding a lot more time to do process surveillance, to spend time making sure the plant's running well, optimizing the plant, when before they were chasing data around and trying to do stuff in spreadsheets and things like that. One of the things we did not do well in BP prior to about 2011, 2012 was we didn't keep the systems updated and patched. So if I had, the 1997 version of PhD in the Gulf of Mexico, that's still what I had, right? And part of this process has been we got to update to the latest stuff. We standardized the gathering historian for each region into Pi because of having the asset framework. And so no matter what we're running on the plant, it comes into a Pi server, and then we put everything in asset framework, and all the engineers and the end users of the data use Pi. And that enabled us to go a lot faster and put analytics out faster using the tool and having a federal structure that allows us to have the right hierarchies. We're able to push an analytic to the whole world extremely quickly, whereas before, every region's kind of rebuilt it themselves.
Question over, a couple over this way.
I'm Flavio Guimarães with Radix. So it's a question for Steve. So it's clear that the models that you built is more related to operational data and time series data. So, but have you considered in the model to be scalable to consider maintenance data and also design data in order to address the whole life cycle of the equipments and the process?
Yes, we're moving into that. We started with the process data because our first use case was the onshore support team. So we started with the MES picture of the onshore support teams really need to be good at their job for us to optimize our production. And we were in the middle of a CMMS transition from Maximo to SAP. And so we didn't want to mess with that by starting to try to bring in maintenance data while we were changing systems. The maintenance data starts coming in this year. And then we've prioritized the systems of what we want to build. And it's a bit about what I said in the presentation, right? We're going to start the model with the first use case, and we're going to expand the model. So we're not going to build another model for maintenance data. We're going to connect it to the real-time data. And then the engineering information is being done with someone else who's here at the conference. We're using eBentley for that. So we connect the engineering information in, and eventually you got one model, everything's there.
And I would just add that at other customers as well, being able to build the context around the tag data is super critical for analytics. And as much context as you can build, the better. And so out of SAP or Maximo or whatever, getting that functional location, for example. You're running an analytic and it's sending off an alert or whatever, and you kind of need to know where that piece of equipment is. And so just getting some of that basic data pulled together is super important in the hierarchy. I mean, we're talking about some pretty advanced machine learning driven sorts of applications here. We've got a lot of companies that we work with. They just want to see their equipment hierarchy, the sensor data, some sensor streams, and their work orders on the same screen. And they can't do that today.
I would also add one thing in terms of right now we have parallel efforts going on for ingestion into our data lake. But what that's helping us understand, again, looking at architecture, how do we need to be able to scale that based on the volume? And so we're considering things like, do we need just one data lake, or are we going to have to put in a federated type model? So again, that iterative discussion between, what it is that you want to achieve and the architecture.
One in the back first.
Thanks. I'm going to move to see Angela in the face. I wanted to thank you to speak about ISO 95 and sort of demonstrate that it is compatible with an edge and cloud vision. There has been a lot of criticism recently. It has been almost fashionable to say that ISO 95 was outdated and that the hierarchical structure was not applicable anymore. Personally, I thought it was a big confusion because I see the model more as a set of business processes, as organizing workflows, more than an implementation and an IT architecture. So to me, it is still completely applicable. But I'd like to have your explicit opinion about that.
I totally agree. And I even went back to some of the ISA 95 experts and said, based on manufacturing 4.0 and digital transformation, are we going to see this model evolve? And from a couple of sources, I was told, no big changes are on the horizon for the exact point that you mentioned, is that it's a business functional model, and we can't confuse that ISA 95 model with an architectural or a zone model. The two need to flange and integrate, but they are separate, and that's when I was talking about we need to consider architecture. As far as on-prem or on the edge or in the cloud, edge is something that we need to be able to consider. The ISA 95 model doesn't map to that, so you have to make it fit for your organization.
It doesn't say that you should do that or not. It just says you choose a way of implementing it.
Exactly.
Your business processes, right?
Right.
The other comment or idea I'd like to discuss with you is the orchestration, the concept of orchestration. I like that, but But I always think that manufacturing operations management is really the term that we're looking for, because we want to manage those operations. We want to forecast what they are going to do relative to what we need to do. And we need to follow in real time what we are actually doing compared to that plan, and see if we can manage it in a way that it fulfills the requirements. So I really like the management expression.
Right. So, as I mentioned, MES has been around in Dow forever, and our organization is called MES. And that's why you heard me use those terms interchangeably, is that I also like the manufacturing operations management. I mean, that's the glue to me that holds everything together. And, you know, so we function kind of in that lower layer of that glue, and that's where we have to work with our colleagues and counterparts in IT to bridge those activities and to bring all of that together and to make it harmonize and to make it orchestrate.
Thank you so much.
Stay in the back. The question right back.
Hello. Could any of you describe how you move historian data into the cloud? How do you deal with the needs for decompression or not? And what resolution or what frequency can you handle? Because your typical process historians are collecting data at 1 second intervals, but then compressing it. So how do you manage that migration of data into the cloud?
Andy, maybe you faced that, I think.
Yeah, sure. So again, it would depend on, in terms of some of the data rates would depend on which historian, which vendor, and how good their connectivity is, and how you're connecting. So we do a lot of work around the Pi system. That's what BP is running. And the way that the pattern that we see emerging is companies will tend to super aggregate their time series data. So you've got a couple dozen, say, Pi systems out there. They'll super aggregate up to a Pi system on their corporate network, and then from there they'll make the hop to the cloud. We do see some that are hopping directly to the cloud, and some will even put a Pi server on Azure or AWS and connect it up that way. And so the historian vendors like OSIsoft, they do have the capabilities to a number of different ways that you can run those connections. And again, the data rates and the performance, a lot of it just depends on your own network and you know, factors around your own operations. But this is a model that's increasingly being adopted.
One last question of anyone here? If not, we thank you very much for attending. Thank you to the panel for spending the effort to share their successes.